Hard Talk meets great music, Monday to Thursday, 4 to 6 p.m. on NETT Radio, taking you above and beyond.
All right, everybody, good afternoon to you. And of course, welcome to the Drive Time Exchange. Of course, you are listening to New Era TT Radio as we take you above and beyond. All right, coming from the beautiful, gorgeous Twin Island Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. So we want to say good afternoon to everybody, whether you're here at home, up and down the Caribbean, or if you're streaming any part of the globe. Once you're here, of course, this is New Era TT Radio. Welcome to the Drive Time Exchange. And of course, in between this space, this is where we are marshaled by none other than journalist extraordinaire himself, Mr. Tony Fraser. Tony, good afternoon to you.
And good afternoon to you, Charlo. Good day today. Nice sunshine all day. I don't know if there was some rain, good rain by your district. No?
Nothing like that at all.
Right. Well, we have, we need the rain in these times, but I suppose we can take the sun also. Yeah. So today's program, as we've been indicating in our promotions of the program, the program has to do with the subject of emancipation. As everyone should know, Emancipation Day is being celebrated on this Friday coming. And there is, as is usual, the situation, a lot of talk around going around, on the basis of emancipation. So I thought we could chat about it a bit on our program this afternoon, looking at some, deep, difficult questions to answer if we take emancipation going back to the 1834, 1838 period to the present, and to, make some good guesses at whether or not, or to look at it another way, to look at what has happened, the growth and the positive things coming out of slavery, and look at how the African community, the African-based community, which came out of slavery at that point in time, has made advances or not advances, or perhaps not sufficient advances. It's a big question. We're going to attempt to bring it down to a more manageable kind of size. If we say yes, emancipation took place at different points in time in the post-English world, the post-American world, the post-Spanish world, of slavery, that is. And but yet we can make some good interventions, as it were, in terms of how we have done, both in terms of the specific group and the nations of the former African people who were transported into the region. And to do that, we have assembled a group of people who have a good handle on the whole subject. And so let me introduce them as I see them coming up on the screen. We have Olabisi Kuboni, who is a retired senior lecturer of the UWI Open Campus. She has been a political community activist for a long time, and she was a senior member of NJAC, the National Joint Action Committee, and the head of the women's arm of that organization. Welcome to the program, Olabisi.
Yeah, you will have to unmute your microphone.
Unmute your microphone so we can hear you. All right, so we'll come back to Olabisi in a moment. I see Shabaka Kambon is there. Shabaka is director of the Caribbean Freedom Project, and he's education officer of the Emancipation Support Committee. Welcome to the program, Shabaka.
Greetings, Tony. Thank you for having me. Looking
Wonderful.
forward to the conversation.
All right. We have a little bit of distortion with your audio, but I'm sure we'll get that right in a moment also. Dara Healy, a friend and former colleague of a number of years. Dara, good to see you on the program.
Good to see you.
Right. Dara belongs to the Idea Kada group. I hope I'm saying that correctly.
Ida Kada.
And it's a cultural organization. And so let's go back to Olabisi. Are you hearing us now and can respond? Okay, she seems to be having some problems with her microphone. Chalo, we're expecting a Dr. Michael Toussaint. Any
Yes,
we
have him on the phone because we're getting some problems to get him in the line.
Okay.
But we have him on the phone. So, Dr. Toussaint, are you there with us?
I think so.
Nice. Yeah, very much there.
So Dr. Michael Toussaint is a former UWI lecturer, historian. He's a specialist in imperial history and the African diaspora. So we have a great mix of people who can start us off chatting about this whole issue of emancipation and what has proceeded after the emancipation period. Let me start with the historian, Dr. Michael Toussaint. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Pleasant good afternoon to each and every one of you.
Right.
So and you heard my listening of viewing public.
Right. So you heard my introduction, and I'm asking you now to kick off the discussion, posing some responses to the question of the movement forward of African peoples after emancipation.
So that's where you want me to enter. Well,
yes, sir.
As you know, the struggle for freedom and dignity and progress and multiracial progress or multi-ethnic progress is not a journey that ends at a door. It's a journey that is a life's journey, and it is part of history, and it will be part of our future and so on. If you are asking how much progress we have made, I think we have made progress. Our ancestors have provided for us to enjoy a bit of progress. But I think, if I'm to get straight to the point, our education system, our systems of how we treat with the ancestral history of people of African descent and the implications, whether positive or negative, for our present society and the future, it's simply not on the cards in a real way, a real meaningful way. It's not part of our radar. We have fallen short, we have dropped the ball, we don't understand and appreciate what has happened. So we have come very far. I see young Shabaka then I think I must say this: congratulations and hats off to those who had the imagination to continue that struggle, because there is the illusion that it is not necessary, but that is where the problem is. So groups that have, and what's her name, Dara and so on, and professors like the one you introduced that we were having the technical difficulty with, I think they have a grasp of the full-time, lifetime, lifelong challenge that we have and will continue to face. But to say we are there, no, we are far from it.
I'm going to ask you to build on that a little bit later on, but just for the moment, how do we account for this inefficiency or the insufficiency of the movement away from emancipation?
Well, I've always placed things next to the responsibility of education and the responsibility for education. I mean, I once stood in front of a class of almost graduates, and I am asking them, where is Egypt? And I have a map in front of me, and it has a map of Africa, and I'm hitting it silently, and they look at me, and they raise their hand and shout, oh, that's Dongy Carcass. That's point 410. And I knock again, and I get the same response. And then I tell them, I say, look, Egypt is in Africa. And some say, oh, really? That's an example. And I would lay it at the feet of the education system. That means it is possible to lay it at the feet of those who are responsible for developing the education system. But I want you to know something, Tony, and may I say this to the audience and your listeners. The work, the hatchet job that has been done on education is so deep and so heavily internalized that challenge of bringing forth that necessary and vital information and education that the society needs, both the people of African descent and non-African descent, is so deep and so tough that we really have to work at it. I left the class telling them, you know, the Atlantic Ocean was once called the Ethiopian Ocean. And the coffee that we drink has its origin in Ethiopia. And everybody was shocked. And the list goes on and on, because Africans have no history, they have no background, they have no acceptor culture. They are really the least of the people of the earth. And that's the kind of things that subconsciously reinforces itself, because the education is not there.
Okay, thank you for that introductory statement. Let me go to Olabisi Kuboni to see if your microphone is working now. She still seems not able to.
I think she has her system of itself probably muted. So she may be seeing us, but she may not be hearing us. I don't know how to fix that.
I think she's mouthing something, but we are not hearing her. All right, so let's attempt to fix that.
If you can, you can send me her number.
Okay, will do. So let me engage.
Try what you tried with me.
Yes.
Let me go now to, I think we need to run a technical course.
Let's check and see Shabaka is sounding right now. Shabaka?
We have two other persons who I am sure we're hearing you, but we have a distortion on your sound. So let me go to Dara Healy. Dara, are you hearing us well?
I am hearing everybody well. I hope my sound is okay.
And we are hearing you very well. So you heard the introductory statement and my question, my probing as to find out whether or not, or how far have we gone to achieve something connected to, emancipation. It's been almost 200 years since 1838, 1834, whichever the date you want to get at. Your sense of the evolution towards emancipation.
All right. So, well, thank you for giving me an opportunity to be on the show and sending out greetings to the viewing and listening public. I want to gently walk back a little bit from the idea of positives coming out of enslavement, because I think that it's important for us to language how we talk about that period in a very careful way. What I will say is that for me, over the years, I have seen, because I have also been involved in emancipatory movements as a child, from childhood, I have seen small changes. And so, for instance, younger generations now have, many more of them now have African names. And that is a big thing because, I recall African names being ridiculed. Yeah, and, awful sounds being made at African names. And now it is almost, normal for people of younger generations to have African names within certain segments of the society. I've also seen a movement towards wearing of African clothing. I remember as well, and Shabaka would back me up on this. There was a time when you were laughed at for wearing African clothing. And now it is really heartening to see people choosing to wear African clothes to attend formal occasions, weddings, and so on. And I've even seen it on occasion in the parliament and that kind of thing. And I'm also very heartened to see an increase in natural hair on our television screens and in our formal institutions like banks and so on. And as we may know, the 1970s movement was essential and critical in those shifts. But of course, those are, while they are good and they're important, those shifts are not enough. And I don't know if you would like me to go into my caveat on on what I just said, or if you want me to leave it until we move along.
You can proceed. You can proceed.
Okay. So for me, the issue also, one of the major issues is the education system. And we talk a lot about reforming the education system and decolonizing it, but I feel that there's not enough clarity as to what we exactly supposed to do. So I'll come back to that. Then we have an issue where African people are everywhere, but in a lot of ways we are nowhere. We are invisible. We look at the issues surrounding monuments. We look at the issues surrounding even something as basic as our city. How many people know that, for instance, the original streets of our city were paved with limestone coming out of Laventille? How many people have information about Africanness? How many people understand even basic connections to food? We have a number of very posh and high visibility events that take place around carnival time and other times. And the food that's available, it's East Indian, Chinese, Syrian, Lebanese, and Creole. And, Creole is not an ethnicity. And people therefore do not make the connection between the foods that are African in origin, or that African influence, the pilau, the kuku, kalulu, and so on. But even more critically, there is not an acknowledgement that these foods were preserved and were part of a very real movement of resistance, so that all the pigtail and the pigfoot souse and chickenfoot souse and so on, all of these delicacies that we now enjoy, our ancestors were the ones who turned the worst parts of the food that was, just discarded and given to them, and they turned them into foods that were delicious and that they could eat. And there's nowhere is there that acknowledgement of the resistance and the resilience of the African within all those various elements of our society. So for me, there's a lot of invisibility, and even though we talk about hair, there's a lot of natural hair. We still had a occasion where young African men were prevented from receiving their certificates for graduation because of their hair. So while we have made a number of good, reasonable steps within our society, there are still a number of deep-seated issues that have not been addressed and that need to be dealt with as a matter of urgency.
Right. Okay, thank you very much. I saw Olabisi come up on camera. All is well now, Chalo?
Go ahead in the meantime. I'm working on it.
Okay, good. All right. So Shabaka Kambon, who is, as we said, still associated with the Emancipation Support Committee in Trinidad and Tobago, and he's director of Caribbean Freedom Project, the Caribbean Freedom Project. You've heard the opening salvos of both Dr. Toussaint and Dara Healy. Your initial statement on the issue of whether or not the African community in different parts of the world have moved sufficiently in the direction of positive living and understanding.
Yeah, Brother Tony, first let me just establish that you can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Okay,
Thank you.
Excellent. So let me salute my brothers and sisters on the program, Sister Dara, Brother Toussaint, and let me and Sister Dr. Olabisi. Let me acknowledge that in the case of the latter two, they are my teachers. I'm not going to hold them responsible for anything I say on the program here, but but they are my teachers, and Dara is my sister in struggle. So let me what I'm going to do, Tony, is to contextualize everything that Dara and Brother Toussaint have stated already. Let me start off by saying that the Abolition Act of 1833 was a crime in itself. And if we begin to understand these historical crimes, we begin to understand the present better. It was an utter erasure of our humanity. It honored and upheld the rights of 44,441 slave owners over us as property. 37 of the 66 paragraphs of the Act, more than half, are concerned not with freedom, but with the financial arrangements for compensating enslavers for loss of property. Now, what we call emancipation, really should be called white settler emancipation, right? That emancipation was carefully and strategically planned by colonizers and designed with laws and policies and institutions that incarcerated, deported, indebted, brainwashed, and generally extended the subordinations of Africans under white supremacist rule and the exploitation of African labor and anti-blackness into the foreseeable future. The Emancipation Act was the act that initiated a period of apartheid in the Caribbean. And I think we begin to see it that way. At the dawn of the 20th century, a great Trinidadian barrister by the name of Henry Sylvester Williams organized, he brought together Africans from across the world to, in his words, deliberate solemnly upon the present situation and outlook of the darker races of mankind. And through that deliberation, his conclusions were dire. The 20th century, he said, would be the century of the color line. How far people of African descent, the darker races of the earth, distinguished by the color of their skin and the texture of their hair, would be deprived of participation in the fruits and benefits of civilization in the 20th century. And to put this, to look at it from the colonizer perspective, in 1898, the Prime Minister of England, Lord Salisbury, said, and I quote, "One can roughly divide the nations of the world into the living and the dying. The weak nations become increasingly weaker and the strong stronger. It was, he said, in the nature of things that the living nations would fraudulently encroach on the territory of the dying." What he was saying at the beginning of the 20th century is that non-white peoples who were deemed to be inferior according to pseudoscience of the time would eventually die out. And he and his colleagues were of the view that it was not a problem to help them to become extinct, because it was in nature's plan that they would be replaced by the superior races of the earth. So when we talk about emancipation, we have to realize that things actually, one could argue that things got worse after emancipation rather than better. And I'll make one more comment before I turn over the floor. Dr. Toussaint has done a phenomenal piece of research at the University of the West Indies. He identifies a Trinidadian of some means in the 19th century who leaves the country, a man who has resources, who's wealthy, who owns businesses, who is a mixed Trinidadian, who leaves the country, and he leaves a note. His name was Numa Diosis. He left a note speaking about how harsh things were in Trinidad and Tobago in the 19th century, and how impossible it was for somebody with one drop of black blood in them to be able to participate fully in the fruits of the society. And he formed a colony where I am right now in Venezuela called Numancia. And he took many Trinidadians with him to try to found this colony where they could find a greater freedom than the one that existed in Trinidad and Tobago. So I just want to help people to understand that every obstacle was placed in the way of the African at emancipation, and that system in which we entered was nothing less than the odious system of apartheid.
Okay, great. So if I can summarize, of course, a summary wouldn't cover the whole thing, but I think what you're saying is that the difficulties that were placed in the way of anything like emancipation have made it very difficult over the decades, the centuries perhaps, for any serious advance to move forward. We're going to ask you to pick it up at a later point in time to see how it has gone from that early period. So let me go to Olabisi Kuboni. Are you hearing us now?
Yeah, she's hearing us, you know. I'm talking to her and she's hearing us, but for some reason
You're not hearing her. So
yeah.
Something is wrong
Yeah.
with the sound coming out of here.
The microphone is giving us a little problem. So what I'll do, I could probably get her on the phone.
Okay.
Right?
You're going to hold two of them?
Yeah. I'll work it out.
Okay. All right. So let me go back to Dr. Toussaint. Now, we have laid something of the groundwork, and I see your student has talked about your own research work and put it in that kind of context. So given the difficulties and perhaps the non-emancipation that happened back there in the 19th century, what would you say has been achieved or not achieved not up to the present, but in the immediate post-emancipation period. Dr. Toussaint.
Well, according to, I hope I get it right, Dara, it's not that we were not achieving. We were achieving, but I don't think we were achieving at the pace that was required and with the depth that was required. So you speak of Kambon as my student, but I'm listening to him now and he's my teacher. And that's good, because this is a struggle that has to go on. Let me show you what I'm talking about, because I draw these kind of comparisons to students in classes and so on. We have to place this whole question of blacks' emancipation and their achievement or non-achievement in a global context for us to understand the fullness of the effort to discredit, dehumanize, and disparage blacks. We have a superstar in the United States, and I like to talk in practical terms, called Michael Jackson. And he says, it doesn't matter if you're black or white, but he turns out looking white. So that means it matters. Okay? We have a system in the United States today where colleges and universities are being prevented from doing black history or talking about the criminal injustice and atrocities that constituted slavery and so on. We have, and I'm happy that Shabaka talked about the law of Trinidad, because I have it on my desk. And he's right. Let me tell you how terrible it is. Students at CXC and at A levels are asked about emancipation. And the Proclamation of Emancipation, 1834, could never have been emancipation. How could you ask students, not students, your enslaved people, to purchase their freedom if they wanted? Because that's what the act did. It gave you the opportunity to purchase your freedom. With what? Part of the act has to deal with self-purchase. Okay? When you want your freedom, buy it or wait for 6 or 4 years to get it. The word master is used for slavery, and it's used in apprenticeship. So you become an apprentice, but you have a master. You cannot own land. You cannot own property, because that was the nature of slavery. And as soon as you are freed, you are committed to the former master to work. You have a situation that says you have to work 9 times 5 times 9 is 45. 9 hours a day for the planter. Am I making sense? These are the kinds of things that are right here glaring in our faces and before our faces, and we don't recognize that emancipation was pure legalese, legal jargon to fulfill other ambitions of European powers. And I can guarantee you, it does not matter where you look. The United States, Cuba, Brazil, Latin America, French West Indies, any area in the world that you look at, emancipation was not a genuine act or proclamation of freedom. It was loaded with checks and balances to keep the African in a new state of slavery, second slavery as some people would call it. And that is the start of the problem. We look at these things and we internalize them in our students, and they miss some of the fundamentals of continuous repression. And I'm talking about very, very, very deep repression. He mentioned the guy who tried to form the colony in Venezuela. When they realized he was bringing blacks across there, they stopped the project, the Venezuelans. What he also knows, because Shabaka probably read the thing well, is that man had a newspaper that published in Spanish, English, and French. Is he known in our schools? No, he is not known. You travel Europe today, and I have done a lot of traveling and spoken in various universities, and Europeans tell you very clearly that the origin of man is in Africa according to the scientific evidence. But you go and tell a Trinidadian that and he start asking you if you're mad. You understand where I'm coming from. They say that openly, but people don't internalize it because the oppressive and well-targeted nature of Eurocentric and other education systems make you doubt what is before you in terms of scientific evidence. Just as the knowledge base that they had produced pseudoscience, just so it ended up working with people who could hardly accept important truths about themselves that will help them with their dignity. And I'll give you a classical example. I've seen everywhere everybody saying about the Declaration 1834, right? And British Empire having abolished slavery in 1834. That is crap. That was in the British West Indies and in the Western Hemisphere. In India, slavery was going on, and they allowed it. The British government could never have been a group or an element that acquired the consciousness of what is really human freedom. Because it turned on and abolished slavery here, so they say, by that time, but they're buying sugar from slave states. Cuba, okay, Brazil. They went to China, offered China goods. China said, we don't want it. They say, we have knife and fork. China said, we don't want that. We have chopsticks. You know what they did in China? They introduced opium to get people addicted and fought to get people to smoke opium. So you're not dealing with ethics and morality. You're dealing with the convenience of economics. And the reason why the British government did that in the West Indies is because of fear of further slave rebellions. In America, it's the same thing. You have emancipation coming in 1863, but it only realizes itself in 1865. That's why they celebrate something called Juneteenth. Everywhere they put up as a pattern something that looks like emancipation, but in the end, it's the epitome of systems continuity.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have Olabisi on the phone now. Are you hearing us now?
Yes, I'm hearing you and through the phone.
All right. And,
so I'm hoping that you can hear me.
Yes, we're hearing you very loud and clear from the phone. Question is, were you hearing at all what went before?
No, I didn't hear Brother Toussaint's last presentation. However, given all that went before, if you'd allow me to just slip in here.
Sure.
Right. I would say that what I think our ancestors understood, even as they were going through the process, it withheld in a lot of instances by the plantation owners and the colonizers and so on, is that our ancestors understood the importance of knowing exactly how the power dynamics of the situation worked. And so even during the period of slavery, they understood that they had to recognize what power they had and to wield that power in their own interest. So, for example, even on the plantation, you had instances of sabotage of machinery, of working or not working, and so on. And even outside of those more active kinds of levels of resistance, you had the more subtler levels of resistance in that they insisted that to the extent that it was possible, they would retain their names, they would retain their foods, and even clothing and so on, and maintain the kinds of relationships that they were forced to abandon from the continent. And so I think that is reflective of an understanding of the power dynamics between themselves as a group, as individuals, and the planter class, and how they could use the power that they had to resist what was coming from the planter class. And so we had 1834 and then 1838, and that spirit of resisting continued, and I think that that was even so during the slavery period. What I think is our problem now, I hear Brother Toussaint talk about education, which I think is very valid to a great extent, but I think that underlying any particular area of human activity that we can talk about, whether it be economics or education or whatever, is that I think that we have lost the sense of recognizing and holding on to the power that we have and the need to leverage that power against other groups in the society. We have been forced to come into a sense of gimme, of letting people, other people who feel that they have more power than us, letting them dictate that their power is to give us what we want. And I think that what we have to try to reconnect ourselves with is the power that lies within ourselves to negotiate what we want with other groups in the society. And I think that is an important dimension of our being able to continue the emancipation process up to today, and the areas in which we may be lacking or falling short in terms of our ability to stand up against anybody who would want to challenge us or would want to make us feel that we do not have the power to make demands about how our lives should be run. That is why, for example, going back to 1970 a little bit, the notion of Black power was important, and I think that we should see it as continuing to be important, because if you do not feel yourself as having the power to dictate the terms and conditions of your living, then other people will fill the void and make you feel that you are powerless. So I will just stop there for a while.
Okay, so what Olabisi has done is to bring us into the 20th and 21st century of existence of the African people coming out of the past. We heard from both Dr. Toussaint and Shabaka about the unreal nature of the emancipation, so-called, in that period. But let me ask them to come into this century, and we're going to go back to Dara also. Come into the. We accept your statements, both of you, that it wasn't real in a real sense, if you could put it like that. However, what was made of it into the early 20th century? Olabisi talked about 1970 and so on. But coming into the 20th century, what was made of that, if you like, unfreedom state? Shabaka.
Okay, brother Tony. So my instinct is always to talk about the violence that was committed against us. But I'm going to say this. At the dawn of the 20th century, we find an African population, in spite of the violence, achieving in extraordinary ways. So you had a tremendous thrust of African people in business, in newspapers, owning schools, to try to remedy the situation with education, organizing themselves in the labor movement, in the Pan-African movement. Trinidad and Tobago had the highest number of Marcus Garvey's organizations is in the world. It was the third highest organized country with in the world in UNIA, and of course that's because the UNIA took its formulation from the Trinidadian Pan-African Association set up by Henry Sylvester Williams in 1900 when he came to speak at Prince's Building Grounds around the Savannah. And so we are moving and shaking and trying to throw off the shackles of past. Now, what happens when we get to independence is critical. In 1962, across the world, as the British Empire begins to crumble, the British set up they enact something called Operation Legacy, which deprives formerly colonized people, natives, of the evidence to understand the methods of subjugation. They had been methods of subjugation that had shaped their identity under colonialism, right? And so in the Trinidadian context, the colonial office wrote to Governor Solomon Hochoy, asking him to burn all the archives of the evidence of their crimes, the things that we would need to go through to understand what happened to us during colonialism, so that we could develop the freedom policies we would need to move ahead in independence. Sir Solomon Hochoy writes back to the colonial office that it would look bad if at independence a lot of smoke was billowing out of his residence. So they send him back a note saying exactly how they wanted our files to be destroyed. They would put them in weighted crates and drive them out a particular distance into the Gulf of Paria and drown them. And Sir Solomon Hochoy oversaw this criminal activity. And of course, based on that now, we come into independence with a certain naivety, and you see it in the construction of the education system that both Sister Olabisi and Dr. Toussaint talk about. We are the ones who are responsible for the mental slavery we now experience today, not the colonials. The colonials only educated 20%. Only 20% of the Caribbean populations were really functionally illiterate at independence. It was at that point at independence when we tried to create the pillars of these new democracies that we were establishing, that we tried to extend. We tried to build schools across the region, that we naively incorporated colonial epistemic violence as the curricula. We extended the reach of colonial epistemic violence outside of the 20% that had been infected by it under colonialism to the entire population. We created the Negro mentality that we are trying to address today because of our own naivety, and of course, we must also point to the role that colonial violence had to play in that. Operation Legacy was a factor, but really we were too naive, and you could see it in terms of leadership. So we grew up criticizing Dr. Eric Williams for being a backward leader in many regards. But after Eric Williams, things just got worse, because that education system that he had helped to promote across the society created a new class of a new intelligentsia that was even more backward than he was. And so if you look at let me give you an example. When we went to the University of the West Indies to ask the principal there at the time, Brian Copeland, to make it known to him that the university was celebrating the father of apartheid, Alfred Milner, on the oldest hall of residence on the St. Augustine campus. he was completely against the entire, us even sharing that information with the university body. And the letter we wrote to him, he never officially replied to that letter. Of course, during the process of that struggle, we discovered that Eric Williams understood that it was not right for people across the Caribbean to celebrate these kinds of figures. And he was already making moves to get rid of Milner at the University of the West Indies. But now, imagine 30, 40 years, 50, 60 years later, when we approach the university with this information, we find a principal and many members of the administration and a society in general, including political leaders and so on, that would have opposed Williams if he had raised that issue then. And the only reason he didn't raise the issue then is because he didn't want to embarrass Lady Alice, who was the chancellor of the university at the time, and good friends with Milner's family, who are still a powerful family in the United Kingdom. So we have moved backwards since independence rather than forward. And I think that Dara pointed to the fact that, only in the last couple of years have we begun to try to liberate African natural hair. So among all the things we left under, in the context of a colonial worldview, imagine that the hair as it grows out of our head naturally remained captive to a colonial worldview up until 2 years ago. And even when the Minister of Education proclaimed new rules for schools, she wouldn't meet with the Emancipation Support Committee so she could understand the depths of the issue, so that she could actually proclaim legislation that would protect not just students, but African men and women who had challenges in various establishments in work across the country because of their natural hair. So we're talking about, I think I want us to put some blame, as I talk critically about the colonial authorities, on ourselves. I want us to look critically at ourselves in the post-independence period and the way that we treated with those of us in the Black Power movement, like Sister Olabisi Kuboni and so on, and the work that they did. How were they treated? How did the system, how did the post-independence Caribbean treat with that tradition of Pan-Africanism that came into the post-independence period in the Black Power movement across the region? We will find that it wasn't adequate. I'll leave that there.
Let me go to Dara now to get a sense, given all that has been said and by yourself also, given this estrangement is perhaps a way to put it, with ourselves. How is your group going about the task of bringing some information, some understanding and appreciation of self to the people who are, I don't want to say lost, but are somewhere back in terms of moving forward?
Thank you for that question. So IDECADA Group is a woman-led collective, and I would like to share with everyone that the name itself is an amalgamation of the names of the women in our family. Ida, Kisembe, who's passed, and Dara, and Attila. And that is important because the organization is a cultural organization that focuses on empowering vulnerable communities through culture and the arts. And right now we are involved in a process of preparing for the play Freedom Morning Come, written by my mother, Entu Springer. And what that play does, it's street theater, a form of expression that she mastered since the 1970s, using theater as a form of empowerment and information and so on. And what Freedom Morning Come does, it's a series of conversations amongst the enslaved people waiting to hear the Emancipation Proclamation being read in 1834. And through these conversations, you get to find out a little bit about the dehumanization, the torture, the almost attempts to erase African individuality and personhood. And as part of that, at the end, we ask what you're going to do with your freedom. And we see that the enslaved people, even as they are waiting, everyone talked about the rebellion and the resistance that remained throughout enslavement, which is important. We did not sit down and wait for some wonderful people in the UK, the abolitionists, to give us freedom. There was rebellion throughout, particularly when people began to hear about abolition and so on. And this is the kind of work that we do to bring history. History is not dead and it is not in the past. We work towards bringing history into the forefront and to use the culture and the arts as an alternative means of education, a non-didactic means of education and of sharing, because of all the problems with the education system that we've been talking about. So I just want to make a few quick points because I have to run away. I just want to say that, connected to the work that we do, I grew up hearing, forget about that slavery thing. And I never really understood where that was coming from until, of course, I got older and became more aware of all of the issues surrounding Africanness. And I think that we are still very much in a phase of forget about that slavery thing, because as we have all been talking about, there's a lack of ideological clarity amongst our leadership in successive governments. So it's not to point to any one administration. And that is because they too are victims of a colonial education. So they are not able to move past tweaking the education system rather than making it actually accepting of all of our belief systems and so on. So a simple thing would be, for instance, instead of just Christian prayers at official government events and in the assembly halls, have a bhajan, have Euphoria chants, that kind of thing. We have resisted, we have been afraid of making those kinds of changes. And so we continue to perpetuate our colonization, our new colonial existence. So that was one thing I wanted to say. The other point I wanted to make is that enslavement was very clinical, very specific, and very economically focused. Over a period of 400 years, we were subjected to that system for about 30 generations or so. On Friday, we are going to be commemorating just about 187 years of our emancipation, our state of freedom being returned to us. And so we are still in a situation of battling that forget about that slavery mindset. So for us within IDK and for myself personally, as a passion that I feel deeply, there needs to be a reclaiming and a reframing of African culture within this society. One of the areas, for instance, is that whole understanding of Anansi. We have taken the basket of believing that Anansi was lazy and all these kinds of things, when not understanding that Anansi is actually a godlike creature that used resistance in a specific kind of way. I talked just now about African spirituality and beginning to understand African spirituality and making real efforts to accept and understand it and to stop succumbing to these ridiculous Western notions of obia and so on, and not recognizing that our spirituality in Haiti and so on was the root of what was allowed us to be free, right? the education system, well, I mean, I could talk for quite a while about that, the education system. But what we need is to be able to look at it from a specific African lens, which successive governments have been afraid to do, so that we teach our history in a particular way, the spirituality, the storytelling, and so on. The invisibility that I brought up earlier also has to do with the icons. Our icons are nowhere. Brother Kwame Ture is still living on Oxford Street. And so there has been a fear again about making us visible within the space. I don't know what they're...
Thank you, Dara.
Right? There needs to be data, Tony, because the other thing is that, Selvin Ryan and whoever, they would have done reports on crime, incarcerated youth, and so on. But what we need to do now, as we are talking about emancipation and looking at moving forward, is understanding what are the indicators for the African family in terms of housing, education, parenting, entrepreneurship, all of these indicators where we find ourselves very much as an underclass. And what are the reasons for that, and how do we now move forward behind this, forward from this? The languaging that I talked about is important, how we speak about ourselves and how we speak about African people. Even the word African, we're still not that comfortable with it. And I'm hearing a lot of solutions to crime that have to do with policing and so on, and very little to do with the social components of crime. And until we get that right, and until we bring the arts into the milieu as a solution, we're spinning top in mud. And then the last thing I wanted to say is that we need to have programming for children, because the only way that we are going to emancipate our minds is if we start from the youngest. And because we are around children and young people, we know that their headspace, a lot of them, is not in Trinidad and Tobago. It is in anime, it is in Disney, it is in AI, it is in everywhere else but in Trinidad and Tobago. There are pockets where there's that consciousness, but we have a lot of work to do. Yeah, I have to run away. I mean, as you can tell, I'm very passionate about this. I want to say thank you to all the panelists, and I want us to keep talking, all right? And blessings to everyone. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak.
And thank you, Dara, for accepting the invitation and being here. And we surely feel good about the time that you've been able to spend with us. We will talk again at some point in time. Thanks again for being with us. And I want to go now to a break in the programming. We're going to come back in 2 minutes or so. But Charlo, we have to come to the studio to have a sense of...
Visit us at 137 Western Main Road, St. James. S&H Rum Box. Drinking out of the box.
Advertise with us on New Era TT Radio, the fastest growing streaming platform for talk in Trinidad and Tobago. Audio and video ads welcome. Elevate your brand with us. Connect with us at newerattradio@yahoo.com or call us at 299-5156. Now, what are you waiting for?
Full discussions, the hottest topics, and some tracks to keep you moving. The Drive Time Exchange on Net Radio, taking you above and beyond.
All right, so we jump back inside the Drive Time Exchange. Remember, you are listening to New Era TT Radio, the heartbeat of the Caribbean. And of course, remember, people, you can get us all throughout the day. We stream all day, every day at newerattradio.com. You can get us also at New Era TT Radio on TuneIn, so that way you'll be able to get us on all of your Google devices and Alexa. You can also pick us up on our Facebook and YouTube as we are streaming to the globe right now. And throughout the morning period, you can get us on M&E TV between 6 and 8 a.m. Sorry, and we stream to Amplio, Flow, Digicel, Trico, and a couple other cable channels in during our morning session. Okay, so Tony, we are back inside, and yes, you can advertise with us here on your Era TT Radio.
Absolutely, and according to your statement a moment ago, there is no reason why you should not be able to get in touch with us here.
None at all.
All right. Shabaka has to leave also, and Dara has gone. Shabaka, you want to give us a minute or two of your closing statement, looking at what has to be done, given the condition that you and others have argued that we are in as a society?
Yes. We really have to take this question of independence seriously. What does it mean for us to be an independent people? What does it mean to address the vestiges of colonial violence that we have to confront? And I just want to draw your attention to how bad things are. I don't have time to go into a discussion in terms of all the things we need to do. And of course, Sister Olabisi is here and Dr. Toussaint is here. I just want to point out that, one of our great ancestors, Otoba Guano, started advocating for reparations, and that's going to be part of the process of deliverance. Back in the 1780s, he started to call, he made the initial call, at least based on our research, that's the earliest call for reparations. He said, slavery is an evil of the first magnitude. Those men that are the procurers and holders of slaves are the greatest villains in the world. If a man have not love in his heart for his fellow creatures, all his other virtues are not worth a straw. So, back in the 1780s, one of our ancestors told us that we should not, under any circumstances, spend our money and our time and our resources honoring the people who were responsible for enslaving our ancestors. Their virtues, none of their virtues, he said, are worth a straw. Yet if you look all around us, Brother Tony, and for your listeners, Sir Charles and so on, you will see these very people honored on all the street names, honored in the squares, honored on the plazas, honored on cafes, honored on buildings, right? Up to recently, honored on our coat of arms, right? And the actual heroes, those people who sacrifice their lives in many instances for the freedoms we enjoy today, are completely erased from our history. And I'm going to give one example to show you how extreme our society is. The man who organized the first desegregated school and desegregated church in this country, if I were to ask anybody in the studio, nobody would be able to tell me his name. We boast that we have a level of unity between the races in this country that the world could look at and take example and inspiration from. Yet the man who took that initial step to allow our children to learn together and worship together has been erased from history. His church and his school were on Park Street where Rosary Boys and Rosary Churches today. His name was Father Francis de Ritter. He was a Catholic priest. And even being a Catholic priest did not give him enough protection from the colonial thinking that erased all of our history, all of our great heroes. And since independence, in the decades since independence, we have not seen it fit to rescue all these great people, men and women, from the obscurity that they were in which they were placed by the colonial epistemic violence. Until the day that we reach a point where we understand, anytime you see a society of post-colonial people that celebrates the people who committed genocide, slavery, indentureship, and apartheid, which are the crimes of colonialism, which is what colonialism was, and forgets the people who sacrificed their lives for the freedoms they enjoyed, that society is going nowhere. That society is the subject of ridicule of society, of the rest of the world. And that's what we live today, brother. And so we have a lot of work to do. I'm going to leave it there because I have to run. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for sharing us with us and sharing the time. Thanks again. I'm sure that we'll chat again at some point in the future. So we are here now with Michael Toussaint and Olabisi Kuboni, two educators. And the question I want to pose to both of them is, given what has been said by yourselves and indeed the two others, how do we begin to move forward from here to get some sense of achieving the objectives that we may have set ourselves, perhaps not set by others? How do we begin to track back from that position? Michael Toussaint.
Hello, are you hearing me?
Loud and clear.
The nature of the challenge is so huge that I probably want to take some time and give some examples of what the problems are and how we can deal with it.
Bring him.
I totally agree with Shabaka and Dara, and although they are not here, I congratulate them for the work that they have done and are doing. And while I have not interacted with the other doctor on the platform, I know of her through reputation and whatnot in the field of education. You see, our struggle, for me, is educational. And one of our great African descended leaders made a point which has stuck with me. He said it's not just emancipation, but emancipation of the mind is the challenge of the 21st century. You could have all the education in the world, but the emancipation of your mind is the challenge of the 21st century. And that is the problem. The mind is really the man or the woman or the child. I grew up in an environment in which my grandmother and great-grandmother would go pulling my nose. You must have heard when somebody say, you raise your nose. What I mean? That means you do something. So as a doctor, I would have raised their nose. If my nose would stay flat, you know what I mean? I wasn't being in the academic fraternity. Those are the kinds of things that are with us. We under-evaluate our potential. We never recognize really that the University of the West Indies, of which I have spent over 20-something years, was really the Imperial College of Tropical Agriculture. We were to plant crops and make sure that the Europeans get everything and so on. And right, it was good to be able to see people getting that education. But we still plantation-oriented. Our education system from top to bottom, and some of my colleagues would not agree, is part of a plantation system. Modern plantationism. Okay? I will give you some examples. The Baptist faith was brought down because it was the most popular faith among people of African descent. And the word Baptist precedes Christianity because John baptized Christ. You understand? Everywhere else it means something positive, but in Trinidad it means something negative. And people talk about even Baptists and Orissa people or Yoruba people talk about Shango Baptist. That's a fundamental contradiction. I'm not a religionist, but you have to study history if you are a religion. You have to study religion if you are into history. Okay? Shango is an African god. And Baptist is a Western, Middle Eastern contextuality. Okay? One is talking about God as we know him in biblical context, and one is talking about Obatala as we know in the African context. And that's because the boundaries between these two have closed so much that what you have is cultural mixing and syncretism. So this thing is so interwoven that the Baptist faith is negated because of its Africanness, but they're searching for God like everybody else. We find out that much later. When the priest in the Anglican Church or the Catholic Church does this thing with whatever oil and so on, that's not symbolism, that's authentic. But if a Baptist do something or Hindu do something, that is the devil. And that is the problem we've had. So when you hear fellas like James Brown and so on say it Lord, I'm black and I'm proud, and you see the hair that they have and they're pushing, you know we're still in trouble. And I don't want to be political in what I'm saying, but I'm amazed that we are talking a lot about blackness. And everybody trying to become, I'm a dark man. Compared to you, Tony, everybody's trying to bleach their skin. Yeah, you have government ministers who doing that, and they're celebrating emancipation like hell. So there's a lot of hypocrisy either imposed without they knowing it, or there because they lack the consciousness. But we have a problem, and I'll tell you this. I think it was Thailand who wrote to Haiti during the hurricane, not the hurricane, the earthquake or whatever it was Haiti, and they told them, look, we understand that your people are in trouble and we want to help, but we want you to know that we think the problem that you have is your people are too dark-skinned, so what we're going to help you with are shiploads of skin bleachers. And I had to deliver that in a lecture in Suriname. So that speaks for itself. Mm-hmm. It ought to be obvious to most of us that the two poorest countries that you can think about offhand are Haiti and Ethiopia. Then why did David rather sing Haiti? I'm sorry. Because he's apologizing for us for not recognizing that without Haiti, we will not have been emancipated. Trinidad is as much a product of the Spanish, the English, and the French. And those French people were coming here all the time. History is a mess in terms of what it delivers. Nobody knows, and you might find me radical, but I have to put these things out. Nobody knows that the British government stole the damn place called Guyana, you understand, because of a fellow called Sir Walter Raleigh. And Sir Walter Raleigh, and they used to come to Trinidad and go to Venezuela to look for El Dorado, the city of gold. And when slavery was emancipation came to Trinidad, a lot of planters took up their stuff and went to Venezuela, because Venezuela is closer to Trinidad than Tobago is to Trinidad. And all the time that they are, the British government not saying anything because you have blacks down there. The minute they discover gold, you know what the British government went and told them? That zone, because of the principles and rules of effective occupation, belongs to Britain, because the people there are subjects and citizens of Britain. All the time the blacks are citizens, you know. All the time they are not citizens, and they are free down there to be enslaved. So it is the kind of problems we have. And every student could remember all the songs by Jacquier and the one who was banned from coming to Trinidad recently and so on. Put the mathematics in the songs so that they will learn it even if they don't want to. We need museums. We need theaters. We need books. We need writers. We need thinkers. We need activists. Every carnival we produce mass. Show me the mass that we produce. Where is it? Where's the repository? It looks like Trinidadians are totally concerned with bacchanal and nonsensicality. Those are creative stuff.
Yeah.
But what we create is not valuable. And I'll make my last point because I know I'm taking time. But I want to show you how important education is. All the leaders in Trinidad, without fail, have decided they're going to put social studies in schools and history is not important. That's because they themselves don't know history. And because they don't know history, they say those who don't know history and the history are condemned to repeat it. We are condemned to stay in the doldrums and stay unknowing and basically unconscious while we conscious. Wide awake, fully asleep.
Yeah. Okay, so Olabisi, as an educator yourself, a lifelong educator at various levels in the system, it seems to be that from all of us in different kinds of ways, are advocating that education is one route, perhaps not the single route, but nevertheless an important one to transformation of the physical and the mental. Your input.
Yes, it is important. And as previous speakers have said, Dr. Toussaint and Dara before him, we are falling back largely in the category of the education system allowing African people to accept and acknowledge our identity and to be able to bring that identity of Africanness into the space in which education is taking place, so that we recognize that various, Dara did speak about, having prayers and so on in the school system, and it's almost always Christian prayers, and not recognizing that there are other areas of belief systems in the society that should also be represented within the school system. So that is one dimension of it, an education system that recognizes the identity and recognizes the identity of all the various people who make up the society, and of course Africans being a very important one at that. But I feel that even as I feel education is important, I would like to link to the whole idea of emancipation the idea of empowerment, because I think that there is a link that we should recognize. I think that is important, not that I want to let the colonizers and the people who control the society, the minority who control the society for their own interests, not that I want to let them off the hook, but I think that we have to shift in a way to recognize that we needed to empower ourselves to make demands that would suit our own interest. I think that is could be seen as a lot of words and that are just throwing out there. But I myself would like to think of my contribution at this late stage to the development of the society, to for African people to being one in which I and others would understand and appreciate and the importance of taking power into our own hands to make demands of people. So, for example, I see that from, say, the 1960s to now, Dr. Eric Williams came on the scene, started the People's National Movement and all that. And in my mind, looking back at that whole period, I grew up just like you, Tony, and probably Dr. Toussaint, in that whole period, whereby we allowed the empowering that we brought out of the emancipation period, we allowed it to be taken from our own hands and placed in the hands of a minority group led by Dr. Williams. And I appreciate what Dr. Williams said. The education I have now, and the level at which I went to in terms of education came out of the movement that he started. So I don't want to disparage that. But at the same time, I think it is important to recognize that as African people in Trinidad and Tobago, we let the power that we took in our own hands to go up against the colonizers and let them, after 1834, to give in and give up that apprenticeship movement. And we took over and said, we want land, we're going to plant land, we're going to be entrepreneurs, we are going to start schools, we are going to start our religion, we are going to do all these things for ourselves. We let that period, starting from the 1960s, 1956, come in, and as important as Dr. Williams was, we let that power slip out of our own hands. And I think that it is time as African people that we take it upon ourselves to regain that power and to recognize that in a multicultural, multi-ethnic society, nobody hands anything to you. You have to take it for yourselves. You have to negotiate with other groups. And that awareness of the politics of the society, we have to start educating ourselves and building ourselves to see ourselves in that light. So I will just stop there for a while.
Olabisi, I think you raised a fundamental issue, and one I want both of you to explore. When we look at the society today, Trinidad and Tobago, and we've narrowed things down to Trinidad and Tobago now, we've spoken about the whole hemisphere and all of that, and that's fine, and the historical happenings of that period. I want us to focus for perhaps the rest of the program to look at where the African has found himself, whether he has been pushed there by the circumstances of the society or through his own fault or a combination of things. But when we look around in the society, and this is something that I've written about and talked about, it is clear that the Africans, and I think you were touching on it, Olabisi, if there was leadership in the 40s and 50s and so on, it has slipped away to other groups, and I am not knocking other groups in the society who have taken the opportunities and created opportunities for themselves and got to where they have got to. And look at ourselves in terms of African people. And incidentally, I am African and Indian, so I can't be one against the other. Douglas come down here a long time ago, and I happen to be one of them. But seriously, I'm saying that the slippage, the descent, if you like, as dramatic as that, is very visible in the society. How did African people get themselves there? Michael Toussaint.
Well, I have been accused of blaming everything on education, but I take that with gracefulness. You know, it is not just about Africans. Let me throw a question to you that might shock you. What time is it? Tell me what time you know it to be right now, the hour.
5:41.
According to whom?
According to the clock that I'm looking at on the screen here.
Right. But essentially it's according to Greenwich Meridian time.
Yes.
What I'm saying to you is that is so empowering and over-empowering that you are telling the world the time according to a place in Britain.
Mm-hmm.
And you would see the fundamental challenge that is before us. We have to have a way to have global time. But your time has been set.
I don't want, Dr. Toussaint, I don't want to disrupt you. but you're, escaping the question that I'm proposing. I'm saying that other people have used the Greenwich Mean Time and have advanced in the society. And the truth be told, Black people are lagging behind. You see it in every sphere of life. Why is that?
And I am telling you now, that it is because of how we are educated and how we are educated to liberate ourselves in terms of business and education. You know Susu?
Of course I know Susu.
My mother used
to send me to pay her Susu
in the bank every month and see how much it makes at the end of the time. But that is almost backward and dotish and stupid. And that is what I am talking about. We need to re-educate ourselves and our values. And then there are certain things that are necessary. Governments need to be able to help, right, through instituting the right programs and supporting them. But the education system does not provide for you to support things African. Other groups who came here, remember, they came after us and they had an advantage. They brought cultural norms and they were supported, right? Because it was in the interest of the British government to support them. That is what you call divide and rule. You may not want to recognize this, and you may say I'm a radical or so I'm not, right? Slavery and indentureship were set against each other, anathema to each other, because that was in the interest of the planter. It is very much like the Muslims in Gaza versus the Israelites.
I still think that you are shading the question. I'm saying that other groups have come into the society after us, after the African population, and have used the same circumstances of our existence to get ahead, whereas the Africans in the society
because they were less
are going backwards.
They are less battered. They were less battered. The challenge is far more difficult for us, and we're going to get out of it because that's how history is, but it's going to take time.
Olabisi.
Could I come in here, Tony?
Yeah. I'm asking the same question of you.
Okay, all right, okay. I don't know if I set you off on this absolute doom and gloom that you came back with. I hope not. Because
sorry, before you go on, I don't consider it doom and gloom. I am saying that the condition exists where there is need for light to take those behind out of the situation, far from being doom and gloom.
Okay, let me just see. As I mentioned earlier, I think that it is time for us to regain our sense of empowerment, which we had in 1834 and beyond. I'm also saying that as much as I appreciate and I benefited from the ideas and the overall thrust of Dr. Eric Williams and the party and the PNM party at the time, I did benefit from it. I think that inherent in that there was a movement that took us backward and let us fall back in significant ways from carrying forward and building on the sense of empowerment that we brought forward through emancipation. And I think that there are people, I know that we don't have the greatest kinds of leaders right now, in terms of political leaders and other leaders in the society. So I am really not putting much hope in terms of how they can lead or how they will lead. At the same time, I am not totally, dismayed by the fact. I think that there are a lot of positives as far as African people are concerned within the society. I think that there is much to be celebrated, that there is much that groups of Africans have done, even given the limitations that we are talking about. At the same time, my personal, and it may not be something that maybe you or Michael Toussaint shares, but I am particularly concerned by what I think Dara used the word, a growing underclass among African people in certain communities. It is something, and yes, it is reflecting itself inside of the education system. And the education system has a lot to do with this particular category of the segment of the population who are largely African and who are living in certain geographical places and who are deemed to be the ones who are carrying this society into criminality. I have a particular concern about that. I see this coming off the ground from as far back as Dr. Eric Williams, and it has taken up speed ever since. And my concern in 2025, I mean, there are a lot of things, right, that one could be concerned about. But my concern at Emancipation time in 2025 is to see the breaking of that underclass mold that certain segments of our society, and Africans in particular, in those particular communities are now living in, and don't seem, the rest of us, I'm talking about don't seem to be able to pull them out. That is occupying my mind very much now, and will continue to. In particular where the education system is concerned, because it is intergenerational. And I have concerns about that. And I don't have any answers to give now or anything like that, but it will continue to be a major concern of mine until whenever I have to leave this place.
Yes. And Olabisi, I am sure that the recognition of it, as you articulated a moment ago, is part of the understanding and appreciation of how to get out of this situation. When I look at the professions, when I look at the exam results coming from Michael Toussaint's university and so on, the shortage.
That's my university.
I am provoking you a little bit, but seriously, there is a gap to be filled. And the point is that if you look at the 30s and the 40s, 50s, perhaps up to the 60s, in the education system, in the professions, in terms of businesses, I remember very clearly the small businesses in Port of Spain, all over Port of Spain, they were owned by African people. Now you can't even see them anywhere. So I am concerned about that kind of thing and how to deal with it, Michael Toussaint.
Well, you have already seen my position. I can tell you, for example, that blacks couldn't go to the plantations and say they want to cultivate sugar. I can tell you other groups came and they were given parcels of land to cultivate sugar because they shaved the sugar industry. I can tell you that in Trinidad and Tobago, blacks would gladly pay property tax because of their civil nature. Other people may not want to because they can't explain how they got all that property. But you might say that I am being extremely radical. Thank God for that. But you see, I deal with history and I deal with the patterns and I deal with what I see as the reality. It may not be the reality, but I see the reality. And I just published a book on the legacy of slavery and independence. It was me and a number of authors, and it's from Suriname. And the question is, and they are right, slavery was entirely different to indentureship. You understand? And they accuse scholars of trying to project as though it's the same thing. It was not. It was not. Right? And that is one of the problems. When we're talking about Trinidad and the society, some people had head starts, right? And some people don't have head starts. What I am grateful for, and I mean, I know the professor there may not agree with me, or she may. I went to UWI, and I never paid a cent for education. I became a doctor. I've lectured all over the world. That was an opportunity for me, who my grandmother and great-grandmother used to have to pull me up by the nose. You understand? And I have been exposed. You see, I taught a lot of world history, and I know nations are divided in the interest of imperial powers, whether it's India and Pakistan, whether it's Palestine and Israel, and so on. And I can tell you there are subtle ways of doing that. And we have been put in our place by historical experiences. And I don't think it is entirely because we're full of shortcomings. We made the steel pan. Then there's a question about the steel pan and its authenticity. And it's the number one new instrument in the world because you save electricity, you create psychomotorical dexterity, and so on, and you clean up the place through using a waste product. And everybody say that is a waste of time. So when a pan man comes and he's talented, everybody say, well, that's like a real deep pan, And what next? And in RL is the star boy. Education, self-respect, human dignity. But I am exposed to the perhaps lack of understanding what I'm talking about.
Well, I want to thank you, both of you, for participating in the long discussion. And Dr. Toussaint, I paid caution money. I never got it back. I didn't break up university property, but somehow it just never came back to me. That's to make the point that you didn't pay anything, period, but I was not so fortunate. I lost my deposit, my caution money.
No, that's okay. That's okay. That's
only
fine. I respect the university. I like the university, but I know they are far behind in terms of an understanding. That's why it was Beckles who came to the conclusion that he's going to write and question reparation.
Mm-hmm.
He's the big man in the university.
Yeah. Olabisi, thank you very much for participating. In spite of the difficulties of the technology, perhaps next time when we have you on, we'll get that straightened out, but we try our best with the technology. Thank you very much for being with us. And just to inform both of you and inform our audience members also, this program is going to be repeated in the morning, and Charlo will tell you about the time that it will be repeated. So thanks again for being with us, and who knows, next time, Dr. Toussaint and Olabisi Kuboni.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for the discussion.
Okay, so
thanks for having me and tolerating it.
The rebel. Yeah. All right. So thanks to all our guests passing through this evening, and thank you very much, Tony, for another enlightening show as we go into the holidays. Tony, I want to wish you a good holiday. Enjoy it, and we will.
We still have tomorrow, don't we, Charles?
Oh yes, I'm myself.
yeah. You're going ahead of time.
Yeah, I think that's because that
yeah. We have another program tomorrow.
Yes. I forget we are only at Wednesday. Okay, so thank you very much. So people enjoy the rest of your day. Keep it here on New Era TT Radio.